let's make a YouTube video. Welcome back to the channel, where today we have a very special video for you all to watch with me. I'm very excited about this. This one is the first tier list of the Prismatic Evolutions format. This weekend we have the Puerto Rico special event, so we definitely want to look at what decks are doing well, what decks aren't doing so well, from both my own local testing, looking at Limitless data, and I have compiled what I think are the 10 decks that are going to be most likely to be seen at the top tables in Puerto Rico. So I'm really excited to get into it with you guys. So let's get right down to business. First deck we have here for us is the Archaludon EX. This deck is kind of one of those like very fringe decks right now. I feel like it has a much better chance post-rotation when we lose a lot of things like the V-Stars. Gardevoir gets a lot less aggressive. You lose Lugia, you lose a lot of these decks. Regidrago is gone as well. Archaludon just also gets a lot of help, especially with the Hop deck. Being able to hit those big numbers it kind of lacks now with the Hopsization. But right now, for this format, I think one of Archaludon's biggest weaknesses is it really struggles against the big stage 2 decks, your Charizards, your Dragapults, your Gardevoirs. And I think in this format, those decks are kind of really good. So for that, I'm going to put Archaludon in the C tier for now. Personally, I would love it if this deck could just pop off this weekend and really just show people like me that I'm absolutely incorrect about this deck. Moving right along though, we do have the Charizard EX deck. Charizard is again one of those decks that just like kind of refuses to not be good, right? Like it just, with the Burning Darkness attack doing 180 base damage and then an additional 30 for each prize card your opponent has taken, in addition to cards like Iono being able to slow your opponent down, also refreshing your own hand, Pidgeot allowing you to grab basically whatever card you want, and the newest addition being the Dusknoir from Shrouded Fable just really allows you to do so much with the deck. And this deck just refuses to be bad, and I think big stage 2 decks like this are going to be really good this format. I think Charizard right now is probably the weakest of the three. So for that reason, I'm going to put it kind of at the bottom of A, top B. The next deck we have to look at here is Dragapult EX. Dragapult has kind of, for most of its life, been just an attacker in Regidrago, right? It never really had a ton of success on its own. Just a Phantom Dive 200, spending 6 damage counters to your opponent's bench Pokemon any way you like. Just has kind of always been a fairly underwhelming attack. But I think with the addition of Budew in the Prismatic Evolution set, it kind of allows these slower stage 2 decks to kind of force the more turbo and aggressive, and even the Regidrago decks to kind of slow down a little bit. And it gives them a real good opportunity to take those big knockouts and set up those board states, especially with Phantom Dive and Dusknoir, where we can really do our 4 and 6 prize turns, you know, turn 4, turn 5, whereas before you were losing on turn 4 and turn 5 and you weren't able to get to your big board 6 prize wipes. Whereas in this format, I think you have a much better opportunity to do that. For that reason, I am going to put this in A tier. I think if the turbo decks can get around the Budew, it really allows them to still do what they did before. So for that reason, I am putting this deck in the A tier, because you do also still have to place down those 2 prize liabilities like Dragapult, like Pheasantipity. I've even seen some decks run Lumineon or Squawkabilly, even Mew in some cases. So I think having those 2 prize liabilities on your board still allows the big turbo decks to boss them up. Maybe if you don't have Budew down, it opens up their whole plethora of items they can use. So for that reason, I do put Dragapult in the A tier for now. Up next, we have Gardevoir, and this honestly is probably the best deck in the format, in my opinion right now. Gardevoir just gets better with Budew. It's such a splashable attacker, having no retreat cost, no attack cost, and 30 HP, allowing you to Buddy Poffin for it as well. A card that Gardevoir and Dragapult both use very well. So for that reason, I am putting Gardevoir in S tier. Gardevoir again has all those 1 prize attackers to really effectively have that prize trade against the big turbo decks, against Regidrago being lower. So having less Drago in the format with Budew, making that a much more difficult time to set up multiple Regidrago V-Stars, makes it a lot better for decks like Gardevoir, for decks like Dragapult, for decks like Charizard, which makes the big evolution decks a lot more viable. when kind of its worst matchup, Regidrago, is much lower down in the format. Up next, we have Gholdengo EX, and this deck has kind of gone up and down in the format, depending on what has been good, what has been viable in the format, and right now I think Gholdengo is entering a really tough format. Gholdengo is a deck that relies on items like Energy Retrieval, Night Stretcher, Superior Energy Retrieval, the new Energy Surge Pro Ace spec to set up to get those energies really big in that hand early to ensure that big turn to knockout with the Make It Rain attack. And honestly, I think this deck is really going to struggle this weekend. I think it just, with the amount of Budu I would expect, not being able to play those items is going to really hamper this deck and really kind of force you just to have it early to really take those big knockouts. And maybe you're able to kind of just naturally have that Gholdengo, have the 2 energy. You do still have the coin bonus attack, right? So if you're able to set up multiple Gholdengos, that could really help you out. But I think for right now, this deck for me has to go in the D tier, unfortunately. It's not a deck I enjoy putting in the D tier, but it's just kind of, the deck is really struggling right now. Up next, we have an oldie but a goodie, Lugia V-Star, and this is honestly a deck that I personally just wish was good again. You know, I wasn't an active player when Lugia was really great in the Silver Tempest formats, but this deck just refuses to die, and I think right now it does have a very good place in this meta. Just not being able to really be disrupted by the Budu, but also a slower format, allowing Lugia more time to set up those Archeops, makes it a really interesting situation right now. For now, I'm putting it in B tier just because Lugia does still have its own issues setting up, right? We don't have as much acceleration like we did have back in the older format, so I think Lugia still struggles that way. But if you can find a way to be consistent, if you can run hot with a deck one day, you could have a really good weekend. So for now, I'm putting it in B tier, but I very much could see this deck making a top 8 appearance, maybe even winning the whole event in Puerto Rico. But for right now, just because of those consistency issues, I have to put it in B tier. Up next, we have Merida EX, the first big turbo deck we are seeing. And I think turbo decks are kind of in a hostile format, with decks like Gardevoir being out there, with Dragapult, with Charizard, all these big, thick stage 2, 300 plus Pokemon. It makes it really hard for these turbo decks, especially if they can't hit those big numbers. Miraidon is kind of in that boat, right? Unless they equally bench, the Raikou can't really hit 300 damage. Really your only option is the Raichu, and that really is discarding a lot of energy, right? You're talking about discarding 5 to 6 energy for 2 prizes in a deck that doesn't necessarily always have energy on board, right? I think the Iron Hands EX also being able to take out those Ralts early, take out really anything on their board early, and being able to take those 2 prizes with Ampy very much, but also requiring 4 energy, could be kind of difficult for this deck to do, but it is also a very good deck. I'm putting this deck, I'm putting it at the top of B, bottom of A, kind of in that range. Again, if you can find the right build, and obviously this deck has been around for a long time. It's got a lot of good results, so I think this deck naturally is very good. But ultimately, this is the last format where this deck is going to have its current iteration. We lose all the Vs. We lose Raichu, we lose Raikou, we lose Rotom. Forest Sealstone goes away. So your Arven for Forest Sealstone gets way less impactful. But for right now, this deck is in a very strong position for this format. Up next, we do have Pidgeot Control. I, for one, am not a big fan of Control. Just in general, I don't think it's fun to play. I think it's really unlikely that Pidgeot has a favorable format, especially in here, but it also does have the Budu. So for right now, for Pidgeot right now as it sits, I really want to just put it in D tier. I honestly just really want to disrespect this deck as much as possible, because I just really hate Control. I think Control makes the game less fun. I think it makes it less enjoyable. But I think for Control, it is also entering a new format. So I think Control is also at its weakest in a new format because they don't know what people are playing. They don't know how to prepare their lists. They run a ton of techs, right? They run a lot of one-ofs. So for right now, I'm actually going to put this deck in C tier. I think if you are the right player, if you are a Control player and you are a guy you're someone who's putting in all that time, all that work, you are grinding, you are doing everything you can to make this deck as good as possible, I think you could have a very good weekend. But again, it requires a lot of time, a lot of work, a lot of very small decisions you make as a control deck that down the line will mean if you win or lose the game. Up next, we have a deck that is very near and dear to my heart, Raging Bolt EX. This deck is so powerful, so strong. The main issue with this format is Gardevoir. Gardevoir is honestly Bolt's probably worst matchup outside of maybe Control or Snorlax Stall. And Gardevoir being that good in a format makes it really tough for Raging Bolt players, right? Really, your only method of winning is you have to pop a turn 1, you have to kill a Ralts early. The second turn, you have to do it again after they've evolution, turn 2. Hoping you go second, first off. So like you really need to go second. Kill a Ralts early, kill a Curlia again. Force them to constantly burn their Pokemon recursion. That way late game, they're not able to Super Rod for a Drifloon because they've already had to burn their Super Rods going for Ralts and Curlias and Gardevoirs and rebuilding their board state, not reestablishing attackers. So for that reason, Bolt being that rough in this format, especially with Budew in that deck, they can really hamper your setup if you don't have a really great hand. I'm actually putting this deck right in the middle of C tier. I think it just has a really rough time. And unless you're a player who has really put that time in and done that work, the same with Pidgeot, the same with Bolt, the same honestly with Goldango, Archaludon, all these bottom tier decks, you're really gonna have a rough time. So if you really are set on playing a turbo deck, I would really say start locking in on Merida. And that's probably gonna be your best bet just because of Iron Hands. Being able to hit that 120 for 2 prizes is just so good. And last up in our tier list, we have Regidrago V-Star. This deck has been a king in the past formats, and with the inclusion of Budew in this format, it really hurts this deck. It really does. You know, the energy switches being turned off early, being able to set up that turn 2 Regidrago is gone. You really can't prime catcher. Like, you turning off basically half their deck with the Budew inclusion is just so rough for this deck. But I do think Regidrago still has a place in this format. I think it is still a B tier deck. I think if you can find a way to set up and exist without worrying about the Budew, without being able to work around the Budew, without having your items, and still being able to hit your big Apex Dragon attacks early, could show this deck still has a place in the top of this format. And this is ultimately, this is Drago's last hurrah. This is Lugia's last hurrah. This is a lot of decks. They're kind of their last chance to really show that impact before the cards they rely on, if not the deck itself, rotating with Regidrago, with Lugia, a lot of the V's in Miraidon, Forest Sealstone, really just an absolutely impactful rotation this year that we are going to be hit with. But ultimately, that is the format as I see it. This is the tier list how I would select my deck. If I was just playing the best deck overall, it would definitely be Gardevoir or Dragapult. For me, I love the turbo decks, so I would probably lean towards Miraidon, at least right now. But that is the way I see the format. I appreciate you guys so much for watching. Thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful day, and we will see y'all on the next video. Have a good one.